Hi, I'm Amber.
And I'm Jessie.
And this is Glowing in Tech. Powered by Makers.
Don't forget to check out our website, follow us on social media, and if you want to watch the 4K video, head over to our YouTube.
It is exclusive on YouTube, so you can watch it on video. Also, our socials are at Glowing in Tech on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.
Lovely. So we are very lucky to have the wonderful Nelly join us today.
Thank you.
Nelly, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah.
It's my first time being on a podcast, so I'm a bit nervous, but
very lucky to have your debut with us.
Exactly.
But I'm excited to be here.
No, we're excited to have you. I'm so excited. So can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I moved to the UK around 7 years now, from Kenya. Originally in Kenya, grew up in Kenya. So I moved here to start working at American Express, join their graduate scheme program, which you were there before. And I stayed there for around 5 years, and up until late last year when I moved now to Microsoft, where I am right now. And I've been working there for now 8 months. Yeah.
Ooh.
Congratulations on the new role. So what were you doing at Amex and what are you doing now at Microsoft?
When I was at American Express, I had very varied roles within the 5 years. So I started off, before that, when I was in Kenya, I used to work in a bank and I was doing Android programming.
Ooh.
When I moved to American Express, I started off as a web developer, and it was more full stack. And it was more around helping, building a website to help customers refer other customers to Amex products. Thereafter, I moved to a different team to do more helping developers within the company. So it was more developer-focused role, doing more open source work. So we're building a micro front end that was and is still running most of Amex website. Then after a while, I decided I needed a change and move towards more DevOps focused role. And the reason why I did that is like I really enjoyed helping developers become faster as they build products, especially because I noticed that most developers just like doing the programming, but if you don't fix like how you take it all the way to production, then it becomes like the product never reaches your customers. And I realized like I really enjoyed that segment of just speeding up the development process and making it a great developer experience. So I started to pivot away from doing more like programming type of work. And I started looking into the first product I encountered was GitHub Actions. So I did a lot of that type of work, building the pipelines around that. And then later on in my role was helping a team. Like this was my last role. It was more infrastructure based, more architectural role, helping a team improve their development practices, both front end all the way to looking at the pipelines and how they do that. And they were running on Azure at that time, and that's how I got myself into Microsoft. So it was kind of like a pillar, just kept on growing from there. Like I'll find something new, find it interesting, and decide to venture into that field.
Fantastic.
So now my current role at Microsoft involves helping software vendors, we call them ISVs, and who sell through Azure, and startups make their Azure experience better. So main aim is usually to collect feedback from startups and software vendors because they're usually on the edge breaking stuff.
Yeah.
So most of the time they come to us with, we've really tried these different options, but there's something wrong, that either the documentation and we capture that feedback. So some of it could involve adding a new feature or creating new documentation, or even looking at how they're doing the current processes. And we feed that back to the specific product teams. And they work, and they're the ones who now use that information to build products and improve that product. So it's been an exciting role. It's like a lot of change, considering I was used to being behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And now I'm more talking every day to customers that use our products. Yeah.
Fantastic. It really sounds like you've done a lot. You've seen a lot of sides of technology, tried a few different roles. I'm really excited to talk to you about the open source stuff.
Yeah.
But first of all, I want to do the industry insight in 5. So I believe you're going to talk about cloud because that's your specialty for the moment right now. So if you can give us like a 5-minute insight into what that is like as an industry.
I would say it's huge. I think when I was looking at Azure itself and the product it has over 200 different products. So I probably know maybe 2% of that. And not on an expert level, just like keep on growing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things why I like what I like about where I work right now is the fact that it's encouraged not to know things, because it gives you now the opportunity to find out these are the areas that I don't know, and this is what I'm going to be working on. So I would say, like, especially around cloud technologies, Kubernetes, the container technology, that's a huge thing that, it's helping especially software companies and startups as they scale and grow to be able to do that in such an efficient manner. I think it's a complicated technology. Even I am still learning about it. And I feel like it's an area that will keep on growing because there's an ecosystem around that particular area. And I feel like with new technologies like Chat GPT, which I'm sure everyone is now talking about it. I hope you guys have used it.
I love it. I actually love I should be their ambassador. I use it every day.
Yeah.
We actually won a hackathon using it.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the software that powers that and enables that to run is the cloud technology. And I'm sure you've all seen, like, recently, it's getting into a level where it's like maximum. Then there's a maximum number of people that are using it. So you might not be able to use it. And that's why now you need to get more cloud to support that type of infrastructure. And the more it starts processing more complex stuff, like now with the introduction of it to Bing and being used much more widely, I feel like it would enable the cloud to grow much. The cloud technologies will continue growing faster to enable that. And as well as, now, especially like you've mentioned, building something with it, I think that's the next step. And it's a great thing that we're talking about open source, because something like OpenAI, which is available for anyone to start using, I feel like I'm not 100% sure. So maybe part of it you have to pay. That's a way that you can start contributing without really having to pay for like a full-fledged, access to it. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic.
And I'd love to know, like, how would you describe the cloud to someone who has no experience in technology, like is kind of looking into various different tech roles that they want to do? How would you describe the cloud and like the roles in that to them?
Okay, that's a really good question. I feel like I would start off by saying it's what's running everything that we now use in technology. That's just from a basic level. In terms of career options within this field, that's a really good point, because my career has been quite interesting. So I've never really looked at if you're a beginner, where do you start from? Actually, I think cloud is one of the areas where there's so much resources in terms of certifications that you can get through to. I'll speak about Microsoft. I know there's an Azure fundamentals certification that you can start doing right now. And the way it has been created, yes, you definitely need to know a little bit about technology, but it talks about the fundamentals. So I'd say those are like really great places to start. And then you can branch out, because there's cloud engineering, and then there's like the DevOps, and then within DevOps there's CI/CD. So there's like the continuous integration, which is a different like that's for like daily development, building the application. And then you have the deployment part, which is the continuous deployments, and all those, there are different technologies in between each of them. So if I look at my career and give advice based on that, I would say start off with something that you can start choosing right now. So for example, when I started off, it was more like GitHub Actions, something I use daily and a way for me to learn. And then from there, I branched off to now understand better what are containers, how can I start choosing this, how can I make my current work process better. But that's from a perspective of right now. But for beginners, I'll say the best way is to start doing research around cloud and try and do one of the certification. That's a really nice way. You don't have to do the exams, but you can just look at the training, because all the cloud providers have some sort of like really big training resources, especially for beginners. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
I think that's such a helpful piece of advice, because it can be overwhelming. Like you said, cloud is a lot of things.
Yeah.
So if you start Googling what is cloud and how do I get into it, there's like so many different pathways, right? So starting with the fundamentals is a great way to do it. And we'll have the resources that you recommended in the show notes as well.
All right.
Lovely. And also you've delved into so many different tech roles, which is incredibly impressive. I don't think I know anyone who's done as many tech roles as you have, but there can be a tendency for us to put pressure on ourselves to know everything when we're in that role. But because you've been able to move so much, how would you advise those people about learning on the job? Because you must have learned the technologies while you're in it, right? Or
Yeah. I feel like I'm still learning on how to navigate that. And I feel sometimes it can, especially in certain roles, like for a long time, I feel like the industry has always been like, you can specialize and become really good at one thing. And then, everyone knows you about for that particular thing. But my perspective has been different, because I'm really like, I like trying out different things. And especially if you're in the front end world, it's very much, we know front end JavaScript frameworks, how many come out all the time. So I would say that because of the changing nature of technology, you have to be always open to learning something new. And I would say one of the key things that I've been learning recently and for the past couple of years is the art of learning, not just building that as a skill. It's in itself. I feel like a lot of people assume that it's something that, okay, there's all this new stuff and I don't know where to start from. And I think I'll share a link. There's this really nice article where someone talks about how to learn. Really.
Yeah.
And it starts off by just acknowledging that you don't know something. And I think it helps because you can just write down what you don't know. And from there, it just reduces the amount of work you need to do, because you can now really go down into the details. I want to learn how to write JavaScript unit test. You start from there, right? And then what do you know? You know JavaScript, right? So you also acknowledge that you know a lot as well. And then you just give yourself grace, do some research, find a community, find people who can mentor you. And I think for me, that has been quite useful, especially finding mentors, people who are already in the industry and they know how things work, because they've learned a lot. And also learning from others. And I find like learning from others can be like, working with other people, working in projects, and open source is a great way. And the other thing I would say is also teaching others. I find it quite fulfilling and it reinforces what I'm learning. So I'd say start off with finding out what you don't know, and then by the time you finish, teach someone, and it makes it sticky.
It does. It does, especially when people ask you questions, and it can reaffirm the fact that you actually know it. Like I remember when I was teaching for Code First Girls, people would ask questions. I'm like, oh, I actually do know this. So it helped with like me thinking, oh, like, who am I to teach to, oh wait, girl, she knows some of the things, at least. Not all the things, but at least some of the things.
Yeah. And accomplishing something, even like I feel like you can say, I want to learn Kubernetes, but it's such a huge, ecosystem. Why not just start with something small, like I want to understand what a container is. And then from there, that can be maybe take you 2 weeks to understand roughly. And then after 2 weeks, you've accomplished that.
Yeah.
It's a journey. And I feel like sometimes making it such a, like I need to learn Kubernetes in 1 week. It's just like
those clickbait titles have got to go. Like in 2023, let's get rid of these kind of clickbait titles. They've got to go. Like one thing that I've been advised on, especially at the beginning of my career, was to actually use open source projects to practice and learn new technologies. Can you walk us through like what open source is?
Yeah. So I would say open source is sharing anything and being able to allow others to use it, modify it, and be able to like contribute to it as well. I think in recent times, especially, it's become important to define open source in a wider scale other than just sharing source code. Because I think initially I think when I was doing some research on it, it's been now like more than 20 years since the word open source launched. And I think initially when it started off, it was more focused on source code itself. But now it's more focused around sharing anything. And the reason why I define it that way is also helps new people come into the industry. So I define it in various ways, more in such a way that it can be like sharing something on Twitter or sharing, and someone else is able to share their comments, exchanging ideas, Stack Overflow. What we know in technology most of the time is something using a tool like GitHub and versioning it so that you can see the history, you can exchange ideas, you can build on top of others. And I think one more key thing I need to mention is licensing. Now it's become quite complex if you don't put a license in even your own personal projects. First of all, because of what we do within our companies, you need to check like your contracts. What does it say about software that you build, especially if you now build it in your personal GitHub repo? You might need to license that to, like, let's say a famous license is like MIT. So that's something else that's very important. If you decide to come into open source software and build your own thing, that's where you would start from. That's something important to think about. It's no longer more like just put software there, make sure it has a license so that it can be reused by others and people can feel comfortable modifying it.
It sounds like open source has been like quite a big part of your journey and a big part of how you've learned and grown as well.
Yeah.
And I think something really important that you touched on is like, we as a collective, as an industry, technology industry, we need to make open source a little bit more accessible to the newbies. How do you think, like, what are your thoughts and feelings about how easy it is to get into open source? Because I know for me, I've struggled, and it can be a little bit off-putting because it's quite intimidating. Like, how do I start? So yeah, really keen to hear about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I never knew about open source. I only found out about it through a program called Rails Girls Summer of Code. I'm not sure if it's still running, but it was a program run by community within Rails and Ruby. And this was while I was in Kenya, so they would offer like a stipend and introduce you to a project, and then get you a mentor within that project and get you an issue that you can work on. So that was the first time I started off, and I started off with my friends. So we were two of us. It was kind of like a group.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was a really great way to get us into open source. And there's still programs like that are running. One other program I got to after I finished that, because I got exposed to open source then, was Outreachy. And that was when I did now like my first big open source contribution. I was working on a project called MyForce, and they build financial tools, financial tools for like financial institutions in countries where, like, let's say where I was in Kenya, where like for institutions that cannot afford to like get a expensive financial software. So it helps manage, like, let's say you'll have like a local women's group which are saving, so they can use that software for free, not paid for. So through programs like Outreach, I was able to even find out about a project like that and start contributing to the Android application. And I feel like programs like those really help, because you have someone, a mentor within the project itself, who's helping you contribute and start off initially, and you can reach out to them with questions. But that's not to say, like, let's say now, for example, if you're trying to contribute to software and you're not using any of those programs, and as you mentioned, it's a very daunting task. And I would say it is, because sometimes it needs, like, let's say if you're doing it on GitHub, it needs you need to understand how to use Git, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like GitHub is doing a lot of work around that to help, like with code spaces where you can't be able to edit without having any form of, it's kind of like just accessing the code itself and adding onto that. But it's, in terms of contributing in general, even up to now, unless you find a community that, let's say, has a code of conduct and you know someone, I think it's much more easier to contribute that way. And you feel welcome to ask any type of question. Like, and that can be difficult. So I usually feel like it's up to maintainers. And there's large communities right now that are forming around, supporting maintainers to be able to create that. And also having organizations, open source organizations, that their work is to make sure there's standards around open source software. So it's welcoming. And one of the things is like ensuring that it's a welcoming community, because the way it works, like open source, is that somebody contributes to it, and eventually they become such an active contributor that they become a maintainer. It's like a life cycle. So if you don't welcome new people to the community, first of all, it's not being used, and then there's no maintenance of the product, and we're not benefiting from it anymore. And that's an important aspect of it.
There's so many questions.
Can we cut?
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I sometimes tangent off and I forget like the question.
No, it's all gold. It's all gold.
It's all gold.
It's talking about, the question was about how to contribute for the first time and getting into it, and you gave a lot of great answers. Essentially, finding a community and making sure that you've got support, because I think that is something that's really important, is being able to ask questions. I think a lot of the time, when you're looking, just Googling open source projects I can contribute to, it's not always clear how you reach out to those people. So I know as well with Hacktoberfest last year was the first time they allowed non-code contributions to count towards it. Yeah, so people could contribute by, helping edit documentation, designing things. So it wasn't just for people that had coding experience. So things like that, I think, will make a big difference.
Yeah, and it makes it a lot more welcoming. Sometimes even at hackathons, people are like, oh, I'm not a coder, so I can't go to a hackathon. But little things like saying, like, you can still contribute. Like, you don't have to be a coder to be able to build stuff or make a difference. And documentation is something that is normally at the bane of all developers' experience. I work with back-end engineers who don't like to document.
You mean front-end engineers who don't like to read the documentation?
Look, mate, when I get the API, what do I need to pass into it? Let me know. Let's not get into that. Me and Jesse will always have our front end versus back end wars.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I think it's a really good point. Like, I think there are a lot of projects that would be so grateful to have people be like, I can help make this documentation clearer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like that's why some projects nowadays, they always have like a contribution.md file, which is the first place I would say for anyone who wants to contribute should go there to see how they can start contributing. But as you've said, I think the fact that open source now is welcoming people to contribute other than source code, you can do other forms of contribution, like creating a list and then sharing that. When you build your website, just put it out in public. If you're making like a fun project, put it out in public. That's what I say, and that's the beginning of open source contribution. You can share like cooking lists, and even up to now, I think lists have become quite popular. Sometimes I'm not interviewing right now, but when I'm interviewing, what I usually do is I do this thing where I search interview questions, GitHub, or like system design questions, GitHub, and you'll find like there's so much resources, people just putting out there like a list of questions you can ask for an interview, asked in an interview. It can specific to an industry, and there's also like projects that are called Awesome, and it's like a list of different types of things. So like you can find an example is GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions, a list of awesome GitHub Actions.
Wow.
A list of awesome front-end projects, or so you can also build your own, and communities form around that because they're just like a place where you can go to find a lot of information. So I think that's other elements that people don't think about when they think about open source. that you can also do. Yeah.
No, that sounds great.
And is it a great way to also stand out in your applications? I don't know if this is a vicious rumor that I've heard, but I've heard that people who are like are very active in open source communities can land roles through their contributions. Is that true? Is it false? Mythbuster.
I say it's true. And I feel like one of the reasons why I got my job at American Express was because of the open source work I did initially. I think it helped expose myself and my profile out there. And I would say even now it works, especially if you start contributing to a project. The maintainers see you as someone who is, dedicated. And for you to dedicate more time, it might mean, joining that group. So that's one way of getting a job. I have also seen in the industry, there's tendency to say experience with open source work as one of the requirements, like in job applications.
Okay.
But I am a bit like not 100% like supporting it. I see it from a perspective of learning how to work with others, contributing back. It's a great thing. But also, there's so many factors as to why people can't contribute to open source.
100%.
If your day-to-day work, like right now, my day-to-day work allows me to contribute to work actually on active open source projects, or just open source is part of my work. So my contribution will show that I'm doing something on GitHub. But if you work, let's say you have it's closed source, right? I used to work for a financial institution. A lot of the software is, you can't see what I'm doing every day. So there are people who are like that. Like they probably don't have anything on GitHub. Probably they don't want to share. But I don't think you should judge someone with that, because there was a tendency around that. I even saw a thing where someone had set up like an automation that would commit every single day. Because you can as well beat it. So if you decide, oh yeah, that's a metric that I want someone to do. Someone just did that every single day, and I'm just like, okay, 365 days of open source contribution.
Oh my god! Yeah, because that's the thing I see at the end of like a calendar year is people sharing their contributions from the last year, right? But
that is such a hack. Let me know how to do that, and you're gonna see all the green squares on my profile.
That's it, because we don't have any green squares that anybody else can see because we're contributing to closed source software.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at another organization, like they gave us an account that we couldn't use our personal GitHub accounts.
Yeah.
And so you would never see the amount that I'm contributing.
Mm-hmm. So that's a question I have for you. Is like, you were doing this in parallel to working full time at points. How did you balance that? How did you have the motivation to do it outside of your
and the time?
Yeah.
That's a good point. When I moved here, I was doing actually active open source contribution. Then it was difficult because I had to get to do it after work. I'd finish work and then start off with it. And I would say at that time was I didn't have a lot going on for me like after work, so it was fine. But now, I don't know, like over the weekends, I just want to relax, It's difficult. And I feel like that's where, if you get into open source, I feel like it's just, you have to think beyond, why are you contributing to this? Are you passionate about it? And I feel like that pushes you to contribute more. But I'm also a big advocate of, taking the time to rest. So
that work-life balance.
Work-life balance.
That soft life.
Yeah, because it's important. That's an important aspect. And that's why I feel like if you can't contribute to open source, there are other ways you can do it, And that could be like GitHub nowadays has a feature called sponsorship. You can sponsor someone. If you're using a software, you can, because there are a lot of the open source software, people leave it because there's like, you have cost of living right now. You can't be writing software for free, even if millions of people are consuming it, unless like there's a way to sustain it. Sometimes it's difficult. So a lot of companies do, like, especially big companies who use it. Some of them will like pay give money to the project to make it sustainable. but it's difficult sometimes using open source work as like full-time role. What I've seen happening in the industry is that a lot of times the open source has two models. They'll have the model where it's anyone can use that software, and then they'll have this model where it's like, because you'll find some projects have like 400 issues. So if you're a big company and you want your issue to be solved faster, they have now like the paid, like you pay the maintainers.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're talking money now.
Well, that's
Okay.
it, because
So-
if you have those big companies using this free software, it's kind of exploitative if you're not contributing back in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
I
I
like
think
that.
that's the important part. If you are using open software, and in a way you're going to generate money with it, it's always good to look back and go back and contribute to open source software. And that could also be just paying, and that's being part of the ecosystem itself. Yeah. So that's another way of thinking of it, about it.
So open source was at the beginning of your journey, and it was the whole reason. Well, one of the reasons why you landed a job at Amex. What was that transition like? So when you got that offer saying, "Okay, we're going to move you to what, Burgess Hill?"
Yeah.
What was running through your mind, and what was that transition like?
I think when I got initially when so there's someone who was working at Amex at that time reached out to me on LinkedIn. This was 2015. First of all, I thought, oh my God, this is a hacker. What are they? And I think until when I talked to the in person who runs the graduate scheme program, that's when I realized it was like there was a process that was happening. So I did the interview, got accepted, but then you have like, because I'm moving to a different country, there's a work permit process that happens. So that took maybe roughly 4 months to go through that. And during that process, I wasn't. It never really occurred to me the change that I was making. I think I was so excited. You know, in my entire life, I actually grew up in like a small farm in a village in Kenya. So the transition in my life and in my career was just huge, right? So I think I was just very excited. I didn't think twice about the opportunity. Didn't think about like what the impact would be. So I moved here in January, which is winter.
Oh my God, that
And
must have been a shock.
I'm trying to get out of here in January. I am so sorry.
And in Kenya at that time it was summer, so it's a huge change.
Yeah,
right?
straight away.
Yeah, and I think once I got here, I found another Black woman who was also joining, Maureen. Shout out to Maureen.
Shout out to Maureen.
Oh,
You're a
you
legend.
She had lived in this country for a while. She has family here, so she was able to help me settle in. But beyond that, I would say it was difficult. You know, I think everything was just new. Even just the transport system itself used to stress me out. Using Google Maps, like it was just like the speaking. I think the way I pronounced things with my Kenya English accent was different from how people. So I would have to like, let's say in meetings at work, I would have to repeat some words twice, and I felt that very wasn't. It struck my confidence because I was like, oh, maybe someone doesn't hear, then I'll just keep quiet. And even beyond that, you know, being in a place where I didn't have family here, I was making friends, but I grew up in a very everyone around me was Black. I was just not used to a completely new culture, and being so different from everyone else. My education, I didn't study in this country, so it was just very, very new and so scary. I was excited about the job though, and I'm glad that I had the open source work I was working on, because it really centered me in terms of understanding why and what I'm doing. And also the fact that I was also learning at my job at that time. And I got a really amazing boss called Alex. Shout out to Alex.
Yeah. Shout out to you.
And I think having those and the community that I was able to start building there, Maureen, Derek, it was just like a really nice way of me to settle in. I'd say like there were times when even 2 years later, I would just be crying, just, missing my family. Because now people are moving on with their life, in Kenya, and I'm here. And sometimes things would just get really like difficult with work, with, just day to day living. But you don't have that like community that I grew up with.
Yeah, the comfort of family.
Yeah. And also work was just like, I used to be an Android engineer and I really loved it. And then now to transition into a role, there was no opportunity at that point to continue with the Android engineering work. It was more the open source work was doing that for me. I feel like I was put in a place where I did not like doing web work, web development, full stack. But then I think I needed to, I didn't want work to be like unstable for me. So I decided, let me just take this as an opportunity to learn something new. And even if it means learning how to integrate around me. So I felt like work was no longer like a thing that I used to, I'd just go to work and then come back. Because I wanted to find something stable, settle in as an individual within the UK. And then I can now look at what am I doing at work, which eventually worked out because I was able to take that time to figure out what I wanted to do. And if you ask a lot of people from back then when they met me, I was used to be very quiet, very naive. Like I was just like a really quiet girl. And I think after a while and taking my time, my confidence started to build up. And it took a lot of, being able to build a confidence in myself and finding communities. That's why like resource groups are, I think affinity groups like we had like Women in Tech, Amex. Those were like my communities where I'd be able to meet people, talk to them, and I've found those to be such a solid way to get to integrate in a community. And I feel like if you ask me the question, would you want to do that again? I'd say yes. Because I think I grew as an individual in a way that I cannot describe. And I always recommend to anyone, take yourself out from the environment of comfort. The way you will grow will completely scare you, which is a great thing. And I think resiliency is so important and something that I built during that period of time. And I'm so proud of myself for doing that. Because eventually I got to a stage where I won an award for the work that I was doing.
Yes.
At
FDM.
Amex. Yeah. And if I compare myself from when I joined and even getting to that stage, it was a lot of like being able to build myself step by step and using a lot of the community, the people around me, and the community even outside Amex, like Coding Black Females. I knew about it when I used to live in Bajasel, and I used to come all the way to London.
Oh,
there were days where it was impossible to make it because of the long journey, but those were like really great places to meet people and a community to find people who are similar to you, who've gone through the same life experiences. And when you see people do that and succeed, it's just like, it encourages you. Yeah.
No,
that's so
really
inspiring.
nice.
And I think that you needed one more sign to jump on that flight and move. That's your sign.
I'm out of here. No, but I did want to say before we go to part 2 was I wanted to ask about, so you said that you were quite shy, and when I was at Amex, Nelly had a reputation and an extremely good reputation. I remember I told my manager that I reached out to Nelly to be my mentor, and she was like, oh wow, she's a very good person to know.
Oh wow.
So you built up this incredible reputation. Did you find it challenging to advocate for yourself? How do you feel like you built such an impressive, strong internal brand, considering that you weren't necessarily feeling that confident in yourself at the time? Or did that happen over the span of your career?
I think it's that's a really good question because I haven't thought about it. But now that I think about it, it's more like slowly, small steps. It would be just being in the team and then building this feature in the team, and getting recognition from that. And I feel like those are like stepping stones. if you look at some of the advice around building your confidence, they usually say like it starts with, small things. Sometimes it can just be making a bed in the morning, and then now you've done something, you've ticked a box. So I feel like I started off with that, doing small things. And I'd also give myself like I don't know the right word to use, maybe like extreme goals. Like I'd say I want to be able to speak in a conference.
I love that.
Then I work backwards. How do I get there?
Yeah.
So I would do stuff like that, and then finding communities and working with people. So let's say like a lot of the things I used to do, I always did them with Maureen.
Shout out to
within
Maureen
Amex.
again.
Yeah. So I'd find like a community. So even if I'm not good at something, she'll compliment me. And and that is like, it builds up and helps you grow yourself, but also as well as advocating actively for yourself. I do remember there was a time our team was building a product. We're moving to actually React from AngularJS, and there's this work that we needed to do as part of the back-end Java work. And my boss at that time was like, oh yeah, we're just waiting for the senior engineer in a different team to finish off the work and start doing it. You know what I did? I started working on it. The senior engineer never left their team, and I did that. I feel like it's not like my boss didn't. I think my boss didn't think that I could do it. Not that it was like a negative thing. I don't think he had seen me do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like by putting myself there and doing it, that's how I was able to prove to myself, and also other people could see. And also another thing was, I'm not sure if you guys know about the Grace Hopper conference.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I submitted my talk there. No one told me, Nelly, go submit your talk. I just was like, I have this talk I've been working on and I'm really passionate about it. Let me submit it. And that's how I got into it. So I feel like some of these things you have to go out and do some research and also push yourself, get there, and then you'll get support as well. Ask people questions, find mentors. Don't be scared. The worst thing someone can say is no, but I feel like that those are the ways that I've been able to put myself out there. And whenever I feel like, oh my God, this is so scary, I know I'm in a good place because I'm learning something new.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to wrap now.
Yeah, that's a great place to end.
That's a
Thank you
great
so
place
much,
to
Nelly.
end. Thank you.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to be speaking to Nelly about her biggest career challenges, and then Amber's favorite section.
What's the tech tea?
Thanks so much. See you next week.
Available on all major podcast platforms.